Nurse.org and Major League Sports teams are honoring nurses with discounted game tickets and once-in-a-lifetime experiences. From throwing the first pitch to riding the Zamboni to on-court recognition, join the fun. Visit nurse.org/nurse night to find a nurse appreciation event near you and grab your discounted tickets today. You're listening to Nurse Converse, presented by Nurse.org, a collaborative podcast amplifying diverse nurse voices. Get ready for a dose of inspiration, a sprinkle of education, and a whole lot of community.
Hey nurses, this is Jana Price. Thanks again for joining us on another episode of Nurse Converse. Today we have a nurse who has bravely come on, and they are going to be telling us about an experience that we have posted in some articles, and it's definitely gained some traction. If you guys haven't seen it yet, it was an incident that happened in Arizona at a psychiatric facility for adolescents where on multiple occasions there have been some incidences, but two where the patients rioted against the nurses. I have spoken with a few confidential sources that were present on both of those riots. And now we have one of those sources who are going to come on and advocate and tell us about what went on and what they feel nurses need to know and the public needs to know about what's going on in psychiatric care, adolescent psychiatric care all around this country, and possibly what we need to do to step in. So we're going to have our friend on here, and she's going to be telling us a little bit about what goes on. So without further ado, we're going to jump into it and we're going to get started. So thank you for joining us. And once again, we want to let you know that every nurse out here who's listening to this, we support you, especially in the psychiatric community. The outcry from what we've posted has been enormous. There are nurses all over the country speaking up and saying, this happened to me. This is what's, her story is very similar. Their story is very similar. And it's really an honorable, brave thing that you're doing coming on and speaking with us. So thank you.
Oh, thank you so much.
So let's go ahead and jump into this. And for a little bit of background, we did post the story with the 911 calls, and there were two separate 911 calls, one in February of 2024 and one in July of 2024. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. And they were made by two separate nurses on two separate occasions with two separate sets of staff at each incident, each riot. So I'm going to just step in. And if you haven't heard the 911 calls, we do have those posted on Nurse.org for you to browse and take a listen to. But they were intense, to say the least. The voice from both you and the other nurse who called, they were desperate. They were desperate cries for help, that you needed outside resources to come in and for not only your safety, but the patient's safety. So when you made that 911 call, what was going through your mind at that moment that you had to make that call as a nurse in a facility?
At the time that I made the call, I had already called 2 code grays on the unit. And those are just, code saying we need more people. We can't manage what we're dealing with on the unit. And so people from all over the hospital will come in and try to help. But at that point, I called a code gray twice. We had still no people. So the only thing going through my mind is that we need more bodies. We need someone to help us contain what was going on, and we just didn't have the people available in the facility to do that. I was just trying to get more people there as quickly as possible.
And what does it feel like to say we don't have the staff capable to do that? What was that when you had to say that out loud to 911 services? Did you have any kind of a feeling about that?
I wish I could say that I did, but I think that it's something that's just so generally accepted in psychiatric nursing. We don't have the staff capability of having 40 patients with only 2 nurses, but you just deal with it. You don't have the staff capability of making sure that these patients are monitored safely in certain situations, but you still deal with it. We acknowledge it to each other every day on every shift. So acknowledging it on that phone call, it was just kind of normal,
Yes. Wow. Day to day, just what you deal with every day. At what point did you realize that this was too much? Was it early on in the shift? Was it later on in the shift? How did this come about that you were like, wow, at what point was the breaking point that we have to call 911? We're overwhelmed.
I believe it was I had one person respond to both of the code grays, and this was a BHT who was trying to help physically subdue the patients. And he started being assaulted by multiple other patients on the floor in response to him coming up to assist. And when he was becoming just assaulted repeatedly by different people, and I could see it, and there was nothing that I could do to step in and help, I think that's when I was done. Like, we had to call for help somewhere outside the facility. Yeah.
Right. So when you're saying that, I'm hearing that you've called 2 code grays, now we're getting assaulted. Let's go back and say, what was the staffing ratio that day?
We had 26 adolescent patients with 3 one-to-ones on the floor. So we had 3 BHTs assigned to those one-to-one patients, but they weren't able to assist on the floor in any way. They had to stand by that one-to-one patient and redirect if needed. And then for the 26 patients, then we had 2 nurses and then 2 BHTs. So 1 BHT and 1 nurse for one side of, say, approximately 13 patients. And then for the other side, 1 nurse and 1 BHT for about another 13 patients or so.
Wow. And BHT, that is a behavioral health technician. Okay, just wanted to clarify that. For that amount of patients, for the 2 nurses to the 26 patients and then 2 behavioral health technicians, is that enough for anybody out here who doesn't do psych, is that enough to even safely take care of patients? Or what would a standard safe ratio be?
That's a great question. I think at that facility, standard would be 12 or under. 12 patients to 1 nurse. But then that is in every facility, it's supposed to be acuity dependent. So if you have very low acuity patients, you can have more patients per nurse or more patients per number of staff members. In an acuity that was that high, where patients had been physically assaulted, coding, fighting, had been threatening to riot all week, that was a severely deficient amount of staff.
Wow. We obviously have violent patients, or, things happen in psych. We all know that, even those who don't work psych. What does it normally take to restrain just one violent patient? Like, what does the staff response look like, in your opinion, that would be safe?
Every facility that for psych facilities, every facility has this like a training program that they refer to. There's many of them out there, but they will say safely you need at least 2 people to try to restrain one person. But the reality of it, if you're actually going up to someone who is being physically assaultive or even harming themselves, and you kind of have to get into a scuffle with them. Usually 2 to 1 is not sufficient. You're going to have multiple people trying to grab arms, safely hold them, and then possibly someone else to go and help with the legs, maybe more than one person. Getting them from maybe the open milieu to a safer area takes more staff, people holding the doors. You have another staff member who needs to be calling the provider to get orders for a physical hold, for possibly medications if needed. So you need, I would say, in a good code, you would have 5 to 6 people at a minimum responding to help you with one patient.
Wow. And that was not even close to what you had for response for multiple patients on that night. So we do know that 911 was called. The police did come, and they could not subdue everybody, and they had to deploy a pepper bomb on the unit, and to get everybody to calm down, or the ones that were rioting. And I say that the ones that were rioting because here we are. We've got, you're in a psych facility. These patients obviously need mental help. They're ill. And you have some patients who aren't violent. They're there for other reasons, and that might not be part of their diagnosis to have violent outbreaks. They could have other things, let's say depression or suicidal ideations and things like that. So now you've got these patients, adolescent patients, you've got staff, and the police come in and they pepper bomb the entire unit. Tell me about what that was like for the patients who were not involved in the violent outbursts and the riot, and for the staff. What happened with that?
It was terrifying. I think for the patients as well, it was just incredibly scary, the whole process. So from, some of the patients rioting, tipping over furniture, tipping over the refrigerator, pulling a phone off the wall. So that in and of itself is scary to witness. And then you have police coming on the unit, attempting to gain control. They're ordering the nurses around. I'm not sure if I can follow their orders or if I have to be with my patients. So I'm conflicted there. That adds to the anxiety of the situation. And then they have some of the patients, they're actually following directions, but once they get to what they feel is a safer spot, the police, they did what they needed to do, and they deployed the pepper bomb. I think it's actually a pepper ball gun that they used and shot pepper balls on the unit. But then that powder coats everything. And it migrated from one side where they were actually still trying to subdue the patients over to the other side where we had kind of focused the safer patients of the patients who weren't involved. And so everybody was pepperballed. We were all unable to breathe, just coughing, choking on the air. There's patients there that they're already hyperventilating and anxious. Then they can't breathe. So they're like coughing and choking so hard they start vomiting. There are a couple of patients who were fainting. They were saying, I can't breathe. And we're just trying to go around and almost triage the ones that we can see because they're so physically affected on top of just already being just terrified. It was really awful.
As you're telling this, I can, in my mind, kind of put myself as somebody looking in on the room. And as a nurse, my heart breaks because these are our kids. They're kids. And despite, a lot of them have the mental illness that has violence, they're still adolescent kids and the ones that are innocent. And then you also have the staff. How many would you say? I hear you say that it bled or creeped into the other room, the pepper ball substance. How many people overall do you think were affected by the pepper ball?
Every single one of the patients. And then we had at least, by that point, 5 or 6 staff members, upstairs. There was a nurse who'd stayed after on day shift who was charting on the second floor who came up trying to help us at one point. There was a couple other nurses that managed to come up and a couple other BHTs that weren't originally assigned to the floor, 30 to 35 people. And even this is a 4-story facility. It bled through the entire 4th floor where we were. But then there were also patients who had maybe had a reason to be pepperballed in the past, who were recognizing what the smell was. They could smell it on the 3rd floor on the adult unit. So even down there, that was still escaping into the air and affecting those patients too.
What kind of trauma does this leave on an already vulnerable population that they're already in there for psychiatric help, psychiatric issues? Now we've brought in the police who have pepperballed. As a psych nurse, what are your thoughts on what kind of trauma that can bring up?
I think it just adds another layer for one. So they're more than likely, they've already had a significant amount of trauma, whether it's bullying at school or even bullying in the hospital earlier that week, or, abuse by caregivers or whatever it is. They probably already have a significant amount of trauma to have the type of crisis that would warrant their going into an inpatient facility. But then on top of that, this is a really significant event. I think that in and of itself is traumatizing. Mm-hmm. So you have that just additional layer of trauma. But then in the future, how much less likely are these kids going to be to ask for help if they find themselves in a crisis, if they find themselves having suicidal thoughts or, urges to self-harm? How less likely are they going to be to just seek help knowing that that was their experience?
Hey nurses, looking for exclusive discounts? Nurse.org has you covered with deals on everything. Save big on the essentials you need to excel in your career. Don't miss out. Visit nurse.org/discounts for the latest discounts made just for you.
That they came into a facility for help. They're adolescents. We already know that their brains are not fully formed yet, and it's the responsibility of the mature older adults, and especially they perceive nurses to be caring. And they come in and then they're pepperballed by the police. And in my mind, that just creates a tragedy that is for somebody like you to be carrying that as a nurse. That's terrible. That has to create a really tough spot for you as a nurse as well. Tell me a little bit about that. How does that make you feel?
For me personally, I feel like it fuels the fire to want to speak up, to like want to make change, because I'm not making any changes in that hospital system. That hospital system isn't going to change their staffing. They aren't going to hold themselves accountable. So then for me personally, rather than just feeling defeated, which is I think would be my alternative, it makes me want to get the word out, like to create change through another avenue. But I don't know that that's something that, it's not something that I see frequently in the industry. People, I think, are more scared and just tend to either silently leave or do what they can to just mitigate the situation, so that they can get through a shift.
Absolutely. Well, in that, let's backtrack a little bit here. In speaking with some of the other nurses who were present for both of the riots, and especially for the one that happened in July, there was a lot of evidence and documentation that allegedly nurses had spoken up to administration that this event was going to happen that night, that there had been documented instances, allegedly, that the patients were going to riot. So when that happened, the question becomes, there was already an incident in February where they had rioted, 911 had been called. The same thing happens in July. Was there anything different? Had anything been done differently in February for the first 911 call? In that time between February and in July, had anything changed prior to the second 911 call? Staffing, meetings, any type of anything that you can think of?
Honestly, no. I think the only thing that stands out, and I think it was in the interim between the two riots, was that the Acuity form that is used to determine staffing, I think it's a JCO requirement. It may be a state requirement as well. That Acuity form would tally the number of staff needed for the next shift. And that would be something that we could all see. That whoever filled out the Acuity form would be able to see that. That stopped being something that was tallied like publicly among the staff. It would be something that only managers could see. But then as far as whether or not the actual number of staff on the floor changed, no, not at all.
So ADOSH in June, ADOSH, which is the OSHA of Arizona, a nurse that I had not spoken to, but I saw the documents, had stated that I made a complaint into the ADOSH that there was unsafe staffing with sometimes a 40 patients to 2 nurses ratio. And the facility responded with a long list of not necessarily changes that had been made allegedly, but there was a list of what they supposedly had in place to mitigate these types of issues. And this was in June. Now, in July was when the second incidents happened of a riot. So from June to July, when this nurse stated that there was not enough staffing, nothing had happened as far as changing acuity. You couldn't see the forms. No staffing changes were made from June to July. Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think so.
And so, but the facility was saying that per the paperwork, the CEO at the time stated that they were in compliance with safety, that they met acuity where it needed to be. But on the night, we do have access to the acuity sheet. It does show that there were 26 patients to 2 nurses, and there were 3 one-to-ones. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So here comes the question. After this incident happened in July, the state health department came in. Is that correct?
Yeah.
When the State Department came in, was it triggered by this incident that happened in July, or how did they come into the picture, considering that OSHA had essentially, or ADOSH had essentially signed off in June? How did we get to the health department in July?
So the ADOSH and the state licensing or state health department don't really talk that I'm aware of, that I've seen at all. Fully aware that they came in response to staff complaints. So staff made complaints about the facility to the state health department, and the state health department is the entity that licenses all of these facilities. So they have the right to come in and survey whenever they want to, or if there's a sentinel event, and this I think would be considered a sentinel event, and follow up. So I believe that they did that in response to myself and multiple other staff members making complaints through their website.
When they came in, did the surveyors speak to the nurses who were involved in the incidents, both in February and in July, or administration only? What's the mix of, if you're aware of the staff interview about what had been going on at the facility between February and July?
To my knowledge, they didn't talk to or speak with anybody in either of the riot, any night shift staff members at all, or because this occurred shortly after shift change on night shift. I don't know that if they spoke to any nurses or staff members on day shift, if that ever happened, I'm not sure. But I think it primarily are the nurse managers and administrators that, greet the surveyors and kind of guide them through, answer any questions, get them the information that they need. And they're the primary point of contact, when something like that is escalated.
And the report, they did find multiple deficiencies, 10 major ones. And we do have that information available for you on Nurse.org if you want to see the reports. Very concerning things. Staffing, it was made known that staffing was not adequate. They had some incidences of patients not being safe. One, in fact, states in the report that one of the patients was able to strangle themselves due to there not being precautionary measures in place. So the code cards were not up to standards. They had open packages. There were all 4 code cards were not up to speed. And as an ER trauma nurse myself, looking back and thinking you just pepperballed a unit with kids who could have multiple issues and you don't have a code card that's up to speed, that alone speaks volumes to me. So those were documented in the report, multiple issues. Did anything change that you're aware of, to your knowledge, after they were cited up until the time that you were on floor death?
Not that I can recall. I can't recall any significant changes at all. I don't even recall an email sent out about the incident. I don't recall even any acknowledgement of any kind after it happened.
And it's also documented, not by just you, but many of the nurses and the ones that I've been able to speak to confidentially told me that there were, on both times, both in February and in July, that administration allegedly told staff that they are not allowed to use the word riot, and that some of the staff said that on July that they were no longer allowed to call the police, that they were to call administration first, according to sources. Can you confirm or deny this?
Yeah, I can confirm that. There was an adolescent unit meeting, and the manager at the time of the adolescent unit said, we don't want, if you have to call 911, don't use that language. And the reasoning was that because police will respond a certain way, anticipating a riot, but then, it may not be the response you want or we want, really. I was in a meeting with the nurse manager, the CNO is they have there, and then also a couple of the nurse managers about the incident, and they, in that meeting, told all of us that they would prefer, they're kind of maybe floating the idea that if we do have to call police, we would call the nurse administrator on call first and then have them call police or 911 for us so that way the situation can be conveyed in the way that they felt it should be. So adding just an additional step between us getting emergency services when we need it because they want it routed through administration. I don't know that either of those things actually came to fruition, but those were two of the responses in the immediate aftermath.
Okay, and here's a question. The night that it happened, did administration respond? How were they present? Did they come and stay on the unit or come and help when all of this went down for a 911 call?
So that was something that we all felt were very upset about at the time because there is always a nurse manager on call and a house supervisor at the time would be reaching out to them and did reach out to the nurse manager before 6 p.m. 6:30 when the shift changed. And then also after. They didn't respond in any way until after the unit was pepperballed and, we had 10 to 15 emergency vehicles stationed outside the facility. Channel 12 News showed up. That's when all of the management began to show up and they stayed for a few hours and left.
And according to sources, some of the patients went to the hospital, some were discharged. So census went down, but that was because some were went to jail. Some were stayed in the hospital. I read in the report, the police report, there's a 94-page police report documenting from multiple police officers, multiple redacted accounts, but multiple sources and information stating that those who went to jail, but there were injuries that required these patients to go to be checked out at the hospital. So now your census is down. And you still have the same amount of staff. You're still handling the kids who basically have experienced a traumatic event. Nurses have dealt with a traumatic event and BHTs. You have been assaulted. You have been pepperballed. And from the sources, I read that they started admitting patients again throughout the night. Can you confirm or deny this?
Yeah, I had an admit. I was given an admit. I believe I refused to do it. I just said I can't. And they had another nurse come up and do the actual admission for me. But there was another adolescent patient admitted to the unit after the riot.
After everything.
Yeah, that night.
I mean, that is just, it hurts to hear. I mean, I know a lot of psych nurses out here are listening to this going, this is normal. And coming from an ER trauma nurse, I know it's like you're just coming off of a code and they're going to throw somebody in your bed or, you're on the ICU and you're drowning and you're going to get a patient. We've all felt that pain, but this pain, your patients have been hurt. You've been assaulted. You have been pepper bombed and now you're going to get patients again, all for the sake of putting, and this is just, these are my words, putting dollars in the pockets of those. And that is not okay. It's not okay for nurses. It's not okay for patients. And, but here we are. And this brings us to one of the most important questions that I have to ask. And it's, tell us why, because I know there's nurses out here, you are hearing this and you want to speak out, but you can't. So why do you feel you need to have to be anonymous? What's the concern and the fear there? Because it's real.
Retaliation. It's how or why people don't speak up in the facilities more often. It's why people don't report things to state as frequently as they should or to JCO. It's because they will retaliate against those nurses. And so there's always that fear of retaliation. And then too, with Psych and specifically, it's a really small community. And so if you are one of the people that is a troublemaker or speaks out, then that's going to follow you. Unfortunately, if everyone did it, it wouldn't be an issue. If more people spoke up, then the ones you wouldn't have to worry so much. But I think that there's definitely, for me at least, a fear that it will affect my future ability to get work, to just work in this industry, in this community. And, UHS is a very big company. They're publicly traded. So the fear of retaliation from them specifically is a concern too.
Absolutely. You've really, really brought to light in one terrible instance the issues that are going on. And they're not, while the patient issues can always be complex, the fix is not complex. It's actually very simple. It's just a matter of having the nurses like you step up, speak out, and say, listen, something's got to change. This is not acceptable anywhere. And I give you kudos, and I can assure you that every nurse listening to this is behind you. At least every nurse out there working in this, we're behind you and we support you. And for any psych nurse out there listening, I just want to take a minute to tell you thank you for everything that you do. I know I have a sister who works in adolescent behavioral psych, and to hear what goes on and what they have to deal with and what they take on is so admirable, and so speaks volumes of the person that you are willing to go in and deal with such a complex part of nursing. So thank you all, and thank you all the nurses. I know that this is going to be triggering to a lot of nurses out there. You're not just in psych. It's no lie that right now nursing is struggling with patient ratios and violence and administrative abuse. And let's call it what it is. It is administrative abuse. And so many of us have had to sit in it because it's a paycheck. We have to support our families. And it's hard to go somewhere this day and age where the abuse is not happening, where the almighty dollar is not taking precedence over human lives. And that is a really tough place for nurses to be in right now. So anybody listening, we know we're in your boat. We're here. We're sitting in this with you, and we are supporting you. So thank you again for coming on, my friend. Thank you so much for being A, the wonderful nurse that you are, and B, a voice for change. It is such an honor and a privilege to be able to know somebody like you who is speaking up and standing out. And no doubt in my mind, your story and your advocacy is going to speak volumes. And it may not happen tomorrow, and it may not happen soon, but your story and your courage are going to set a precedent for change that will happen in the future. So thank you so much for being willing to stand up and talk with us.
Thank you. Thank you for saying that. And thank you for just your help highlighting this. I think we need to be talking about it a lot more.
Absolutely. And that is exactly what we're going to do. So thank you guys for joining us today. And as always, stay safe out there, nurses, and we'll see you again next time.
Thanks for joining Nurse Converse, brought to you by Nurse.org. Help us grow by leaving a 5-star rating and review on your favorite podcast platform. Nurse.org supports nurses with career and education tips, life advice, and breaking news. Thank you for all you do and for being you.